Evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. I think it is just about 7 o'clock, so a warm welcome here tonight to Housing Committee. And a very warm welcome to our new Vice Chair, who is sitting here tonight. And I'm really glad we've come down from the lofty heights down there, and we're a much more intimate group, because I think we all work a lot better when we're closer together in some ways. We can see the whites of your eyes now, can't we? So we'll start with apologies, and I have two apologies. One from Laurie Davis, who isn't very well, I'm afraid. So we send her our best wishes for a speedy recovery. And Chris Jockle, who's enjoying himself in my part of the world, down in South West Wales. So have a good time, Chris. And of course, this is a reformed housing committee, and so he wouldn't have had it in his diary. And I can really apologise for the late cancellation of the meeting last time, but the apologies were coming in pretty late in the day. Ironically, I tested next morning because I hadn't done my test before coming to council that night. I tested next morning and I was positive. So if I'd done it slightly earlier, we could have perhaps cancelled a bit earlier. So I couldn't have come here anyway. So funny old world, isn't it? So we'll move on to declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? So we'll move on to the minutes of the meeting from 5th of April. Anything on the minutes? Do you want to bring anything?
Yeah, I just see on page 4. Yeah, there we are. Yeah, on page 4 it says an overspend on income. I presume that is extra income rather than an overspend. On
Correct.
page, yeah,
That's correct.
lovely.
Okay. Colin, did you have something?
I was going to say the headphones aren't working, but they just kicked.
Oh, well. Nothing to do in the minutes.
No,
That's
sorry.
all. I'm glad your headphones are working. Thank you. So if there's no other questions on the minutes, can I have a proposal? The minutes? Oh, thank you. Seconder? Thank you, Paula. Can we vote on that? Thank you very much. That looks unanimous. So I'll sign my copy and give it back to you. If I don't, give me a poke. Public question times. There are no public questions. So we will move on to our item number 5, which is a final report for out of hours action plan delivery. And 2 weeks ago, we would have had Joe Gordon with us, but as you'll all know, and at least I hope I copied you all into the email to say Joe was leaving, and I did, and I said something about what I would have said if we'd had the committee, to thank him for all the work he's done for us here at Stroud, and to wish him all the best in Bristol University. Yeah, and I finished it off, and he was in the room when I said this, by saying at least he'd have no elected members to bother him, and he did find that extremely funny. So there you go. So I'm afraid it falls to you, so talk through this report.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Joe. And it is worth thanking Joe actually for all the work he did, and actually the work that he's put in since the first out of hours report taking us onto this. What I'll do is I'll recap on the key issues, which you've all had the report, and hopefully you found the report and the appendices useful. And this, of course, was an issue that was triggered significantly by the events over the Christmas holiday 2020-2021, an audit report that I found us wanting, I have to say. No systematic failure, as we note in this report, but there was service failure. There is a peculiar, not necessarily unique, but a peculiar series of events that left us wanting, and we wouldn't want to move on from that without actually properly considering the issues. And we had a full and frank discussion at Audit Committee and then a report to this committee looking at the corrective actions that was taken. And we did commit to bring a report to Open Committee. And I would probably agree with some members of this committee that thought that the level of detail in that report was not quite what we would want. This report, albeit a cycle late, I think provides us with some of the specific information which details and explains the specific action which has been taken. And so in the section 2, the corrective action plan from the internal audit report is broken into 4 main parts. And for each of those parts, there's information supported in either in the report or in the appendices. One of them is about working procedures and roles and responsibilities, and the need for us to update and have a strong procedure manual, and that we should create roles and responsibilities within that should be refreshed. I have to say, we were more than happy with the recommendations in the report and for us to move on and action them. And I'm pleased that we're now on the other side. And I can say there is, as the report says, there's never 100% guarantee that things aren't going to go wrong again, and things may happen. But what we need to do is we need to understand the risks and put all the measures in place and all the processes and procedures in place to make sure whenever we can, all the time, we're offering the best possible service. The second recommendation links to the contracts and risk management, and the risk register is detailed in the appendix, where Excelsus has been updated to reflect any high levels of risk. We talk about in-servicing, and we are moving to the point where we'll be insourcing our out-of-hours the delivery over the next period. We're not at that stage yet. The actions in the audit report relate to an accelerated insourcing of the heating function, and this has been completed. I think what I've tried to do in the appendices associated with this report is actually show you the detail as far as we possibly can, and we know that it's important that we get the KPIs and performance monitoring right, and we've reviewed all those. I don't think it's acceptable, however small the number, that we don't offer the best possible service that we can. And if we've not done everything we can to try and mitigate the risk, we should be doing. And hopefully that comes through in the report, it comes through in the presentation and the report that we gave to Audit Committee, and earlier when we came previously to this committee. Joe references here, and I think it's just important to note that actually the out-of-hours service sits and is managed within contracted services within our landlord functions, but it isn't the only service in the council that uses the out-of-hours, and we are going to look at that to make sure it's most appropriately sitting within contract service and landlord services going forward. And I think we need to say that you'll be aware that actually while this was going on, and I have to say, completely unrelated, that Civica, who were our contractor, terminated their contract with us, and we're now using Orbis. And I have to say, there've been once or twice when we needed to make sure that Orbis are on the board as well, and that was referenced in at the previous meeting. But I'm confident that we are working really hard to make sure that we're getting this right. I think you'll see from the level of detail that we're putting into this that we're taking this very seriously. And for me, that is what we want, to take this seriously, to take any failure seriously, and to move to make sure that we're mitigating and putting the strengtheners in place. I'm really pleased with the hard work that the team has put in, and I'm confident that we're doing everything we can. We were monitoring this closely. We don't think that we should ever be complacent. But I would like you to consider this as an update and an explanation of where we are. I have colleagues in the room with me who have been very close to this and may be able to assist in answering any questions that you have. But I hope in terms of an overview, that is satisfactory for the time being.
Many thanks, Keith. Any questions on this report? Nick?
Thank you. Thanks, Keith, for your overview there. Just a couple of questions. So I'll just go straight to the back page, so page 37 in the packs. This is the KPIs and the metrics around the out of hours current stats on how we're answering calls. I just want to pick up one point. So in the third column down around calls answered, you've got the three numbers there for March, April and May. It says target 85%. So is that, I know that we downgraded our targets from the previous contract because we weren't meeting those. So we've now set the target at 85%, which is already a downgrade. And year to date, the calls answered is 85.5. So even when we've downgraded what we expect, we're still only just achieving it. From my maths, that works out, well, the easy maths is it's 15% we're not answering, but it's between 30 and 40 calls every single month we're still not answering. Do we really think that's acceptable?
Sorry, Chair. I think under the circumstances, we are working really hard in a difficult environment to do the very best we can. And I would never think that anything other than 100% is anything that we can be perfectly pleased with. But under the circumstances, I think a practical response to that is reflected here.
Lucas?
Yeah, I think it would be good in the future to maybe have a bit of an analysis as to why, whether there's any background information on why calls aren't answered. It's just because people hang up after 5 seconds, or is et cetera, et cetera. So it'd be just good to, in the future, have a bit of background on that.
I think that's an excellent.
I agree, and within these figures there will be abandoned calls.
Any more questions? Nick?
Yeah, it's just to carry on as a follow-up question from Lucas's really. So there's column 4 calls abandoned, 58, 35 and 20. So calls in and calls answered, that percentage does not relate to abandoned calls as a column for that. So that 15% is calls that are not answered. So if I just go back to my point, which is 30 to 40 calls every single month that are not being answered, this is an out of hours service. So every single one of those calls could be an emergency. I worry that this is the final report and this isn't something that we can draw a line under. It needs to come back. If we think that this should be the final report and that we're happy with 30 to 40 calls every month not being answered, that's a real worry. So I don't know what Keith's views on a follow-up on this, potentially every quarter would be, but we need to, that figure there, 30 to 40 calls every single month not being answered, that could be emergencies, is simply not good enough.
As I said earlier on, Councillor, we would never be satisfied other than doing everything that we can, and we are more than happy to be transparent about that and the work that we're doing.
Rain, you're next.
Thank you. Am I working? Yeah. It says here, longest wait, March, 16 minutes and 50.
Could you just say where you are?
Say again? Oh, sorry, I'm on the same page.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. It said the longest wait, 16 minutes, and another one was 15 minutes. How often does that happen? Because that doesn't tell us, it just said that is the longest wait. But how often does that sort of wait actually occur? And sometimes the abandoned calls, are they actually abandoned because someone's got fed up? Or is it because your mobile phone's switched you off? If you know what I mean.
Unless I'm misreading this, I don't know how often. I mean, we get an average, you know, and we get, and I don't know how often. I think at the average, I think will give us an indication about what the wait time is. I think 16 minutes is too long, to be honest with you. But it is in the report for us to see and for it to be explicit, so we can see, and so we can have a look and draw attention to it, which I think for me is an important point that we've got here and we're sharing in the public domain. our performance on this. And I think it's credit to the staff that we're doing this. I think it's a credit to us that we're presenting it. But if are we being complacent, or do we think we shouldn't look at this and strengthen it? I think we should, wherever we can. But the real world is not always a perfect one.
Thanks, Matty. I see that you've got, on the same page again, I see that you've got average idle time, but there's no data. Can you explain what idle time means and why there's no data, and also why there's no data for the average hold time?
I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out and follow it up.
Nick?
Yeah, thank you. Keith, do you know what the target was for calls answered as a Yeah. So do we know what the target percentage of calls answered was under the previous contract? So under the previous contract, I know that we've had to downgrade from that. So we've set the target at 85% and the achieved rate is 85.5 year to date. Do we know what that was downgraded from initially in the previous contract?
No, I don't. I'm more than happy to provide it if you don't have it, Councillor.
Thank you.
I think these are really techie questions, and I think Keith's doing well to field them a bit, but I think we need some help on this from people like Liz, don't we, about this. It's not just, as he stated before, it's not just about the housing service, it's about all calls to out of hours. So they are pretty techie. So perhaps we can get them all written down. I'm sure Becky's putting them down, and we can get some answers back to you. Yeah? You happy with that?
I'm happy with that.
Are you happy with that over there? Thank you very much. Thanks for your understanding. Any more questions to the report? We only seem to have discussed one page, don't we? It's a bit sad when you think of all the work that's gone into it. So if there's no more questions, can I know it says we note the report, but we still need to vote on it, do we?
You will do it, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry? It says we resolve to note the report. So I thought all we had to do was note it, but we apparently we vote. So do we have a proposer, please, for the report? Thank you, Steve. And a seconder? Do you wish to speak to it?
I think that there's an awful lot of work gone into this, and it kicked off the minute that it came to committee. So it's good to see all the work that's gone into it. It's very complex, and I'm pleased to see that it is, yielding positive results.
Thank you, Paula. Any debate? Jenny?
It was quite a techie report, and it took me quite a bit of understanding. I had to read it several times before it began to sink in, but I did find, as I tried to understand the minutiae, that it was very clear, and I think where it helps is it makes clear who was responsible for what and what we expect of everybody. And I thought that meant that we could analyse our performance much better than in the past.
Any more debate? Yeah.
I noticed by the report that it's done March and April, which are not really the most months where we have the most emergencies, are they? So,
Well,
having looked at the April this year, it was quite mild. So I think it would be better to have a look at it in the winter months when we have the real emergencies and much more call volume than we're getting at the moment. But those are very low months to base anything on.
Yep. Nick?
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, I take the points that there's some work gone into producing this report, and that it's better than the terrible service that it was. but that is not good. To answer 85% of our calls, as we just alluded to, in the month of March and April, when, let's be honest, the weather's not at its worst, you've got 15% of calls still not being answered, 30 to 40 calls every month, when every single one of those could be emergency, is not good. So it is deeply concerning for me that, you know, it appears that we're trying to draw a line under this and say, well, that's that sorted. It isn't sorted. It's still a mess. Yes, it's better than it was, but that still isn't good enough. It only takes one resident in one of those properties to be having an emergency. We don't answer the phones. That's just not good enough. This isn't rocket science. It's a company that we pay a lot of money to, being on the other end of the phone to answer the phone when there's an emergency, and they're not doing it 40 times a month. That still isn't good enough, and it worries me a little bit when I look around the room and there's some nice comments about the report. The report's lovely, and there's clearly some work gone into it, but we pay a provider to do a job, and 40 times a month they're not doing it, so that worries me.
Lucas.
Well, I think it's one thing to look at March, then another thing to look at May. This is the start of a contract. And I think to judge the performance on the start of a contract when everybody's still sort of working their way in, et cetera, is not really doing the team also that has to do this justice. And I think I really, maybe we should look at it in 6 months' time, and then I'll take your points completely if we're still at the same level. But I see a marked improvement months on months. And I think that gives me confidence that with everybody's goodwill, you know, no tenant is left hanging, so to say.
Any more debate? Lindsay.
I do actually agree with pretty much most of what you just said there, Lucas. I do know that when obviously this new contract come into service in March, Keith knows we did have an issue very early on. I think that's been looked into as far as I'm aware. But yes, I do think that it's a shame that we didn't have this sort of reporting for the last 2 years so that we could really see what improvements have been made. And I will agree that, like Nick has said, whilst, yes, work has gone into this, and I know Paula said that, you know, it's better than where we were and things like that. I do agree with all of that, but we do need to make sure that we are keeping on top of this and that we do actually keep bringing this back. We don't just go, right, yes, lovely report, put it on the shelf and leave it there. We do need to make sure that this does keep coming out and we get reported back on a regular basis, because like everybody else has said, you know, times of the year that we're kind of looking at the moment are not the sort of key times. You know, when we get to sort of perhaps this time next year, we'll have a much better idea of where we are. And I think only then can we really give an opinion on whether or not this is good or not. So I'm reassured by what I see, but I'm going to just keep a step back and wait until we have a little bit more data. So thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Anybody got anything else to say? Yep, Lorraine.
Just a comment, really. The fact that we're asking questions and debating this in no way detracts from the amount of work that has gone into this report. We take that as read, you know. So just want to be clear, nobody's implying in any way at all that people have not worked hard to produce this, but we still have to ask questions.
Yeah, I quite agree with you. Yeah, thank you. Any more debate? I think we've all had to say, and all I can see in this is it's a getting better sort of report. And when you read about other things that are happening with struggles with workforce and materials and all sorts of things like this, other things that are happening in the world, I still think we have a pretty good level of service here. So would you like to sum up, Steve? Or,
I think a few things can be simultaneously true. That we recognise that the service being provided before wasn't up to the standards that we wanted. That at the same time, this report shows the huge steps and the huge amount of improvement that's gone into that, and it's been transparently shown the steps that we've taken to improve. And I think at the same time, we can agree with, I think, the sentiment of most of our Conservative colleagues that the potential of a single missed call, the potential tragedy is something that we can't rest upon at any one moment, but that we take this report today as a huge positive step forward and something that we should be proud of, that we've tackled an issue, that we've moved forward as far as we have, but to also take it, I think, as the sentiment of so many people saying tonight, that this is a work in progress and we need to keep on striving to keep on improving in this service.
thank you. So, would you like me to read this out? That, well, the committee resolves to note the corrective actions already implemented. So those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous. And was there anybody against or abstentions that when you didn't? No, don't think so. Thanks very much indeed. We move on to our next item. Item number 6. I'd like to introduce Emma Cathcart, who is the Head of Service Counter Fraud and Enforcement Unit, to present her report. It's a very long title, Emma. Welcome to Stroud, Emma.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Emma Cathcart. I'm the Head of Service for the Counter Fraud and Enforcement Unit, which is a shared service, and we work for 6 councils, Stroud included. We also have a number of contracts with social housing providers to assist them to prevent tenancy and housing fraud. Part of that work is clearly using the powers that are given to local government, and that is under the POSHFA legislation. So we are the ones with the powers to obtain bank statements and investigate allegations of housing and tenancy fraud, and we would also be the prosecuting body as well. What I've done is take the same paper to all of the councils that we work for to outline that where properties sit within their district or borough, it would be that council that would be the investigating and prosecuting body, because it's about the local area. The legislation allows other councils to prosecute on behalf of any council, so it doesn't matter where the property sits, but locally, looking after the partnership and looking after the local housing, it makes more sense if a council is part of our partnership to say, well, part of that work is to undertake prosecutions for social housing providers in your area. Clearly, your own stock is straightforward. We would do that as Stroud District Council officers anyway, but this is because social housing providers now building, and it's no longer district or borough led. It's all over the place. So it's just ensuring that we can follow through and prosecute where necessary. It should be noted that any of the work we do where we consider prosecution, this is not about prosecuting vulnerable people. Every case is taken on its own merits. It has to meet the evidential public interest test. This is about going after people that are subletting property for profit over a considerable period of time. It acts as a deterrent. People make a lot of money out of that. It's making sure we can get the money back, getting the property back so it goes to the right people. Hopefully the report was relatively straightforward, but happy to take any questions.
Many thanks, Emma. Questions? Jenny?
Can I ask to point out why we chose to use the word the local authority will seek to recover the legal costs from the social housing provider rather than we will?
We will. I bill all of our authority, all of our clients. So every cost is all the disbursements, all the mileage, all the expenses, any legal costs, etc., are billed to the social housing provider. So we always send an invoice. I suppose the wording there is if they don't pay the invoice, we'd have to look at other avenues. But I invoice them, my team invoice them for any of the costs, so that it's covered.
Thank you.
Thank you. On page 40, 1.4, it says the Cabinet Office has estimated the following savings to social housing providers and councils. Do we actually have any figures of how many times this has happened within us and how much it's each one, well, depending on how many there are, how much each one has cost? I know obviously it's kind of, it gives estimates and things like that. I'm just wondering if we already have any data to say what, sort of a comparative cost, that we had one that has cost us £50,000, one that's only cost us 10,000. Have we got any of that data?
So from Stroud's point of view, that wouldn't be me at the moment because the partnership is relatively new and the work that we're undertaking with the housing team is still relatively new. What I can provide afterwards is some of the data about the partnership, so where we've prosecuted the average cost. And I also ought to provide you with the more up-to-date cost, loss avoidance costs, which the tenancy fraud partnership has worked on to make it more indicative for local authorities to talk about housing in for emergency housing costs, the legal costs, trying to get people out, etc. So I'll send that on as well because that's a little bit better, and some figures on who we've prosecuted and what it, the average cost of the investigation, the legal costs, etc. But this is about loss avoidance. If you house the wrong people, you've then got the cost of getting them out. We want to deter any of that. So part of the project as well is looking at how we vet, what checks we're doing. So we're not giving properties out that we have to then go and recover. We're making sure the right people are getting them. So I will follow that up for you and give you some better figures about the work we've done and how much it costs.
That would be wonderful. But is there anybody within the council that can get any figures of if we have had this happen to us before? Because I'm not sure if we have had it happen. And I just wondered if we had any of that sort of figures or data.
I'll follow up with the officers within the council. Sorry, I was going to say fraud's really difficult as well. The more you look for it, the more you'll find. So it may not be that you have suddenly you have a huge spike in fraud. It's that we've gone looking for it. We've done a proactive fraud drive, and all of a sudden you could therefore have a number of cases, a number of properties, but that isn't a sudden peak. It's not a sudden problem. It's just that we're proactively targeting it. So sorry, just as a
no, I totally get that. No, you can find anything if you look hard enough for it. But yeah, it'd just be really good to see that, if we have had it happen, we've identified that, just those figures of how much it has cost us, whether that is just how much it has cost us in officer time and things like that. It'd just be really good to have that sort of comparative data if possible.
Michelle is going to give us some wisdom from over there.
So we can provide some data. I can't give it off the top of my head, but we can provide some data of fraud investigations we've carried out or that the CFU have carried out on our behalf. To date, as far as I'm aware, we haven't actually had to take any legal action, but we have had some properties back as a result of the fraud investigations, which is obviously the aim at the end of the day. If we can get the properties back without having to take legal action, then it's a win-win all round. So yes, we do investigate fraud, and I can provide some data around that.
And the other thing I just wanted to ask is obviously, as Michelle just said, we do investigate fraud. What is the what's the massive difference that we're seeing with this, what you're what we've got in front of us compared to, is it more just to save time and officer time? Or is it that what you do is a lot more in depth?
It's a mixed bag of things, not specific to Stroud, but across the partnership. So we were formed because historically councils very much focused on benefit fraud and had investigators in the benefit section. I was one of them for 11 years. That changed several years ago, and some councils bid for money to retain staff. And I was one of them that campaigned for the fact that fraud isn't just in benefits, fraud is in absolutely every aspect of everything we do. And there was huge gains to be got of, preventative work across the council. It also was evident that criminal enforcement was a specialism that was also lacking in some of the enforcement areas. So that isn't to say necessarily at Stroud, it's really different across the partnership. I've got some councils who have tree officers with no experience of prosecuting people for cutting down TPO trees, and you've got other councils who are doing it prolifically. We have some councils that prosecute for animal welfare offences and some that don't. So it's just where experience has been lost, etc. So it's just that specialist extra bit where my team are set up to interview people under caution, get legal prosecution file together. They deal with disclosure, they deal with all the aspects of criminal enforcement, which is specialist, and it's just assisting the teams with that extra bit if they need it. So it's working with the individuals and the individual teams not to take roles, take jobs, etc. It's just to add on and say, when you've got that one-off situation where you do want to prosecute somebody, we're good at getting good evidence and putting prosecution files together.
Jenny.
Can I ask, sometimes the vulnerable people here are the ones who are taken advantage by the people doing the fraud, because say if I had a council house and I didn't want to live it in myself and I sublet it for a higher rent, so they're committed fraud, the family are probably paying the higher rent because they're desperate. Do we support them to get housing advice so they can get a legitimate tenancy?
I would say you've got to take each case on its own merits. So if the tenant is complicit, you have to also look at the dishonesty elements around that. There are processes for being housed and taking on private rental. So it's managing that, and I won't pretend to be an expert on housing and homelessness. So intending to make yourself homeless or intending to, the intention side of it would have to be considered. But I'd rather my colleagues who are much more versed in housing answer that. My view would be you've got to look at dishonesty and you've got to look at whether or not they are complicit in the fraud.
I'm looking over there and wondering, I think we'll probably come back to you on that, Jen. I think it's really, I think you've raised a very good point about vulnerable tenants, because sometimes these fraud investigations do identify vulnerable tenants, don't they? And I think that's a really a valuable thing, because especially in our own landlord service, I know we do ad hoc tenancy audits. I'm being nodded at over there, and these things are handled with sensitivity because people are being cuckooed, etc. And that turns that sort of thing up. And as Emma has pointed out, it's not just about prosecution of fraud; it's also about fraud avoidance. So to make sure people do, and not just abide by the rules, but know the rules in a way, because they can be taken in. So, and even silly things like single person discounts with council tax, that people do it sort of inadvertently sometimes. So, or so say, isn't it? So, if anybody else has got anything more on that, but I think our overwhelming thing is that we must support tenants, and always support tenants in their tenancies, and the old days of, hiding behind bushes to see who slept overnight, you know. I like to think they've gone. You don't look the sort who hide behind the bush. So,
It's usually a boring van.
oh, right, okay, okay. So, you know, there's a huge amount of work goes into this, and it's the more you look at it, the more you think you can identify people who do need help rather than just to blow them down.
Yeah, we're talking about the vulnerable. I think the clause on page 41, 2.10 is very relevant. The local authority will only take enforcement action where appropriate to do so with due consideration to older offenders, offenders with disabilities, and where the offender lacks mental capacity. I really think that's important to be in, because I really don't like the idea of us prosecuting vulnerable people. So I think that is an important clause.
That wasn't quite a question, I'm sure.
Yeah,
agrees. Yeah.
I honestly can say that the team are extremely sensitive. You can imagine we see an awful lot of bad things, and sometimes it is through gross dishonesty and greed, but it's equally about, as you say, managing people who need assistance, and they're very well versed in making sure that the right referrals are conducted for safeguarding, if they need help with benefits. If it's about holistically working with all the different services of the council. So if it's the wrongdoing, it's making sure that their council tax account is correct, their benefit claim is correct, and that they're housed in the correct way. But in reverse, if they need help, then it's also about helping them to get all of that too. So whilst clearly the service is about enforcement and is about protecting public funds, it's not about doing that with the wrong people.
Jim Lorraine?
Thank you. Could someone explain to me, because I haven't heard this term before, housing waiting list misrepresentation? What exactly that is, and what there's a cost incurred by removing people from the list? Is that just officer time, or is there something else along there that we have to do legally or whatever to take people off the list that shouldn't have maybe been on there in the first place? Am I right?
So you have your housing waiting list, and everybody's banded. Part of the work we do for a number of our councils is we review your emergency gold and silver banded applications. And there will genuinely be people on there who have forgotten to update their circumstances. They've subsequently found a tenancy, they don't need to be on there, but they haven't let anybody know, they're just sitting. Problem is, you've got all these people to be housed. So if you've got lots of people sat on the list, we're not housing those that need to be when these people are housed. There's also people that lie, we're overcrowded, we've got 7 children, and when you actually look at the information, they've got no children whatsoever. So it's a bit of both. It can be honest mistake, oversight, or dishonesty. So the point of us looking at your housing waiting list is to making sure that only the people that should be on there are correctly on there, and that they've been correctly banded. So the report goes back to say, remove these for consideration or downgrade these for consideration, because we've always got to bear in mind we want to house the emergency gold people first. The cost is the temporary accommodation mostly, because if you're not housing people because you've got no houses, we've got to put them in emergency housing, and it costs the local authority. So if we take somebody off the list, we've therefore avoided paying approximately £3,240 per case, because we haven't had to use emergency housing, we've got stock, we've got the right people. So it's all loss avoidance, which is really hard to quantify. It's about us not spending the money, which is much easier than going out and getting it when you've spent it. But that's what that work is.
Thank you. That actually has cleared that up perfectly well, because I do know people who, not saying they say they've got 7 children when they've got any, but things along those lines. Yeah, I get it. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
It may seem a very silly question, but how are you funded? Are you funded on a retainer, or do you get paid on a case-by-case basis?
It depends who we're talking about. So there are 5 partner councils who pay an equal share of the corporate overheads and strategic delivery. And then they pay on a consumption basis for the operational days that they get. Stroud is a third party contract. So you have a fixed fee cost for the work we do with your benefits section. So we look after the bit between the DWP and the local authority. So we look after all the information that they request. That's a fixed fee, but then you pay per day for any work we undertake within the council tax reduction scheme, investigation world, tenancy fraud world, etc. And you have a fixed number of days. So if we go over the days, I speak to Andrew and say, we're getting near the days. Do you want more? Do you want less? Do you want us to stop? So you're able to budget what you do. So it varies. Some of our third-party clients, so the social housing providers, some are on a fixed fee, and those are the ones where we deliver a high number of days. Some are on call-off contracts where it's a low number of days. But obviously I've got to resource this. So I've got to have an idea of what my budget is to be able to resource it and get people about. So
That was just a general question, just for my own.
Yes.
Thank you.
If there are no more questions, do I have a proposer, please? Anybody going to propose? We've got to resolve. Shall I read it out? The committee resolves to A, note the content of this report, B, endorse the use of appropriate enforcement powers and those powers set out in the Prevention of Social Housing Fraud Act 2013, POSHFA, and C, support the prosecution, where appropriate, of housing and tenancy fraud offences committed in relation to properties owned by the authority or social housing providers within the district. Do I have a proposer? Jenny's proposing. Thank you very much, Jenny. Seconder? Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Colin. Do you wish to speak, Colin?
Yeah, I'd just like to say I've worked with your service before in a different role, and what I found amazing was the access you had to all the different databases and the time to compare them and to highlight certain households as potentially fraudulent. And it's in many cases it wasn't, but it's when records from one agency don't correspond with another agency, don't correspond with another agency. There's that mismatch, and you just work through them. And it's much easier than actually having a concern about a particular household and going out to that household. They were actually highlighted to you in the first place, which was pretty useful because you don't have the time to do it, I don't think, in a general service. So I'm very pleased that you're doing this work.
Debate? Lindsay.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I think it is a good thing because it sends out the message to anyone who thinks that it might be a good idea to do something that perhaps they shouldn't, that we are actually taking a harsh stance on this. So I actually think it's quite a good thing. So thank you.
I think I would like to say and take Colin's point as well. He's not here now, but that, for example, what's illustrated also in 4.31, the equality implication, that harshness needs to be tempered by a real concern we have as a local authority, also for the tenants we have. And yeah, fraud needs to be fought, but equally we need to balance that with helping and also people come out of that fraud. I think that's sometimes people, you know, with small steps, we see that every walk of life, you start with something small and think that's okay. And then it gets worse and worse. And before you know it, you're in a situation you feel at times impossible to get out. Yeah, because then it's owning up to something maybe very big. And I think that's where, besides the harshness, we also need to provide the support to help people move on and not create possibly a bigger disaster with homelessness or whatever. So I think I'm very grateful that this service is here.
Thanks, Lucas. Anybody else? Now, should we go to the vote then? Those in favour, please show. I think that looks unanimous again. Because I'll just ask, is there anybody against or abstaining? Thank you very much indeed. Thanks very much, Anna. Lovely to see you. Item number 7 is a progress update on key action plans, cleaner estates and service standards. And I think we'll talk amongst ourselves while Michelle comes and sits with us. I'm sorry we're all moving around tonight like musical chairs, isn't it, again? Nice to see you, Michelle.
Thank you. Okay, so it's just a brief update this evening. So one of the, we're still looking at refuse. Refuse has still been a bit of an issue for us, and fly tipping in particular, we're working on a project with our site officers. And so now we're looking at putting some skips across the district, and the site officers will be collecting our fly tipping as opposed to Yubico, which will reduce our costs. So at the moment, we're just trying to identify some areas for closed skips. We've had quite a success with the one in Welling Close in that we've been able to get fly tipped items in that area picked up and put into the skip there, as opposed to being picked up by Yubico. So it's a lot quicker when our site officers are doing it as well. We can turn it around a lot quicker. So that's a project that Lynn Mansell and I are working on at the moment. So hopefully at the next committee we'll be able to give you some feedback on that one. We've now procured ARP Research to carry out the STAR survey. So the STAR survey, it's a survey of tenants and residents, and it's a nationally recognised industry standard survey for tenant and leaseholder satisfaction. So they will be carrying that out in October. Christine and I met with ARP Research this week to go through some of the standard questions that people have been asking at the moment and that are in line with the white paper and what we're expected to ask. So those are all produced. We've all put those together now, and we will be looking to put that in October. So hopefully in January, we'll have the results to feed back to Housing Committee. We have been warned that since our last one was in 2019, and we have been warned that all of the STAR surveys they've been receiving since COVID have gone down about 3 or 4 points. So, you know, we are prepared for the sort of results we might get, and we will be working at how we work through those. And this will be very much a starting position for us to make sure that we're improving our services as we move forward. We are, as part of our tenant engagement action plan, which was drawn up as a result of our tenancy engagement audit, we've started to do various bits of work, and part of that was arranging the Tenants' Voice induction dates and mentoring. So Becky and Mike have started their mentoring with Mal from TPAS now, and they've also got an induction in place a bit late in the day because of COVID, but we've got it started now, so we're quite pleased about that. We've also we've got the role for the tenant engagement officer has been advertised, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we will have some applicants. You know, I think it's quite a nice job. So hopefully, I have had some people ring me to talk about it. So I am hoping that when I get the shortlist in a few weeks' time, that there will be some people that have applied for it. So again, I'll be able to feed back to you on that. And once we've got a person in position, then you know we all systems go with our action plan. We've had a really exciting time with tenants and scrutiny training over the last couple of months, but I know Mike's going to talk about that, so I won't steal his thunder. But it's really exciting that we've had 10 tenants go through some scrutiny training, and then they're really excited about looking at what they're going to look at and scrutinise of our services going forward. So it took a while for them to agree on what they wanted to do, but it's been really exciting working with them. So we'll look forward to that in the coming months. During this Q2, we're going to be looking at producing keynotes. So we've got lots of items across housing services where we would like items put into keynotes. So we're going to be talking about fraud. We're going to be talking about permissions. We're going to be talking about the The housing officers, as we're hoping to rename them soon, just to make it easier, rather than a neighbourhood management officer, and the patches they're covering. And we'll also be producing the work on the annual report. So a lot of work to happen in the next couple of months, but we're looking forward to getting all of that together and getting that out there for our tenants. We've also been doing quite a lot of work with the planned maintenance team to look at their timeline for planned works across our district, so that we can consult with the communities in advance, look at any issues or concerns they've got, but also by doing this, what we've actually picked up is where there've been structures built when they shouldn't have been, where permissions haven't been given, and they need to come down because of scaffolding or because of fire risks, and at least we've been able to have those conversations up front with tenants, and it's given us time to have a conversation before works have to take place. So that's been quite successful. We did notice that from COVID, the biggest thing that was out there were hot tubs, and everybody wanted them, and I can understand why. So that's caused some issues with electrics. So we've had to sort of put together some guidance for people on, yes, you can have a hot tub. We're very keen that we work with tenants and give them what they want when we can. So we've put some guidance together on what you need to do with your electrics if you're going to have a hot tub. So that was the biggest thing that came out of some of the work we've done so far, was that they've just popped up right around the district. So it's been quite interesting going out with the plan team and looking at the areas that they're covering. So we've got quite a lot of work going on. It'll be an interesting next few months. Hopefully next time I'll be able to report back to you. I'll also next time, I think, bring the tenant engagement action plan, just so you can see what we've covered and what we've started, just to give you an indication of the work that we've been doing with our tenants. Any questions?
I just wanted to ask about the skips, where they're being placed, and things like that, because I mentioned this probably 2-3 years ago to Mike, one of the two Mikes, I can't remember which one which, either Mike Hammond or Mike Towson, and we were kind of told that it couldn't be done. So I'm reassured that, this is going to happen and that it will save us money. So do you have any just other details on that?
So at the moment, we are just looking to try and find some areas across the district. So we've got one at Welling Close in front of our garages there, which we are waiting for a date for those to be knocked down. So we've had one there for some months, and whenever we notice any fly tipping in that area, we let our site officers know and they pick it up. So that's right in front of the garages, which are no longer in use. And we're, as I said, we're waiting for those to come down. And I know Lorraine is very keen for me to have an open day with the tenants there, and I will organise that date with you, so that we can open it up for tenants to use as well. But we have identified that we have hotspots around the area, and so we just need to identify a suitable place to put a skip. We don't want to take up parking, because we know that's an invaluable resource, but we do need to try and identify some areas. Once we've identified an area, generally what we do is we just consult with people around the area to see what we can do, and will they mind if we take that space, and then we'll be able to sort of choose some areas. So it is really important, I think, that it works. They're closed skips, so people can't just go and put in them whenever they want. They are closed up to us. What we do sometimes get is that people pile up stuff around them, but we will be keeping a regular eye on them to make sure if that happens, we get the items removed. It is a really difficult one. I can understand why it might have been refused in the past, but with the escalating cost of collecting fly tipping from the HRA account, we need to do something. So this is just something we're going to trial, see if it works. Hopefully it will make a big difference.
Just to come back, as long as we're monitoring that we're not moving the problem to other places. I know this was a point that Nick made. I think it was at the last one that you mentioned about this. As long as we're not finding that it's then, that hotspot is kind of alleviated, but then we're finding it cropping up somewhere else. Is that going to be monitored as well as rigorously?
Yes, we will be monitoring. So I think last time I talked about Chapel Street, and although that's still, we do have to monitor that very carefully. It does have moments when, I think last time we did a tour around Chapel Street, there'd been some mattresses dumped, so we had to get those moved. But we've got CCTV cameras there. So we've invested heavily in CCTV cameras as well, which is helping us. But yeah, we are monitoring right around the district just to make sure we don't move the problem from one area to the next. And we do get data every month on where Yubico have collected fly tipping for us.
Thank you. Oh, I just want to clarify this. Are we looking at leaving a skip in a particular place and leaving it there? Or are we looking at different areas having a skip on different days, say every few months or whatever, that sort of thing? Because if it moves, I mean, someone from there, if they want to take the trouble to walk all the way down there, well, fine. But if it moves around the area and everybody knows that there's going to be a skip there on the second month or what have you, or whatever day, that might be more cost effective than, and certainly I think it'd be better than leaving one in one place all the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, at the moment we're looking at having a couple of static skips because our site officers will actually collect any fly tipping from within that area and we'll put it into the skip. What we will be doing as part of our action plan, we're looking at some Love Where You Live events, and with the Love Where You Live events we will promote the fact that we will have a skip there for 2 hours on a set day with officers there while it's there, so that people can bring their own refuse to put into the skip. With those we tend to have a set time so that officers are there, because we know if we leave the skip unattended, it all goes wrong. So we have got a schedule of events, of Love Where You Live events around the district, and those will be for people to have that chance to bring their own rubbish.
Any more questions for Michelle? Nick?
Thanks, Michelle. Just a quick one from me. So you just alluded to earlier. So you said that this is a trial period. So can you tell us how long the trial's for? And in the trial period, what's the expected saving we expect to see from the cost of hiring these skips against the cost of fly tipping? So I'm assuming we did some work around forecasts of that during this trial period.
So at the moment, we're spending about £6,000 a month on collections. So we are, if we can at least reduce that cost in the first sort of 3 months by about £1,000, we'll know we're starting to do some work towards it. So at the moment, we're only going to have it in a couple of areas. So if we can make a difference, we also have an issue with contaminated waste, which we're looking at separately. But with the skips, there is a cost involved in having the skip. So if we can make a difference in the first few months of £1,000 to see if it's working, then we will invest more heavily in it. At the moment, we are still waiting for some more site officers to come on board as well. So it may not happen straight away, but we know the costs that we're spending on waste at the moment, and we know we've got to bring that down dramatically. So hopefully, eventually, we'll be cost neutral, but we're going to start small so we don't raise expectations.
Okay, can I come back on that? So how long, the bits on after, so how long is the actual trial for? And if the cost is, if we spend £6,000 a month currently on fly tipping, what's the cost per month of having skips instead, is the bit I'm after.
That's okay. Sorry, I don't have the cost of the skips on me, but what I will do when I come to the next housing committee is tell you, I'll be able to tell you at that point how much we have spent on skips and how much we've saved. Oh, sorry, we're going to trial it for 3 months because obviously we have to factor in the time that site officers will be working on this.
I thought you'd already trialled it in Dursley for a while, because I noticed there was one that they were using. What's the result of that? Because I noticed the estate is cleaner, so that part of it's working, but what's the financial implication? Because it's been there quite a while now.
So the one we've used in Dursley has just been specifically for that area. So we haven't made it wider. So I think, sorry, Lorraine? We've got one that we use, one that the site officers use separately. So ours that we use for us, at the moment, I don't have those figures on me, I'm afraid. But I know that at the moment, the idea of that one in Welling Close was actually to improve the look of the area. as opposed to looking at cost savings, because we wanted to know if it would work, if it made a difference. But I will get those costs for you.
Any more questions? Any more questions to Michelle? No. Well, I'd just like to congratulate Michelle on this very full report. And here we go. We're concentrating on rubbish yet again, aren't we? It's all we ever seem to do is concentrate on rubbish. And I think I think as well as this trial period, we still need to have a talk with all the other services about education and what people are putting in skips. The answer isn't to throw everything in a skip to take to landfill, is it? You know, we have to talk about where we go next and other means of disposing of rubbish, because sometimes, you know, Free Cycle's taught us this, hasn't it? What's rubbish to one person is very valuable to another. I'm just rejoicing too that we're going to have housing officers again instead of, I can never get my head around NMOs, because the people think the neighbourhood wardens and an MO, it's really quite hard to say. And I have to say, we've got some really brilliant officers at the moment that I've seen. Our own, and I'll name him, his name is Joe Mully. He has been just absolutely brilliant, and he's just one of many who are really great in Michelle's team. And although their patches are large, and we're working on that, aren't we? They do a grand job for our service. So as I say, I hardly ever mention names, but I have to mention Joe because he just has come in like a breath of fresh air. And to call him a housing officer is his proper title, I think. Thank you very much for that. And also, I know somebody's going to talk about the scrutiny day, but is that the one I dropped in on? Yes. Yeah, I was really, the enthusiasm was palatable in the room. It was really great. And look forward to a lot more of those. It's really good to see things getting going after COVID, because people have been reluctant to get together, haven't they? And now they are. I think it's really helpful. And really appreciated of Mel from TPAS, who seems to be really good news. And look forward to our a new tenant engagement officer. They change their roles all the time, don't they? They've got the same roles, they change the names. I'm sorry? A lot of it about today. A lot of what about? Changing roles. I shouldn't have said changing roles, I said changing names. Thank you, Michelle. We move on to the appointment of performance monitors, and we've got, really pleased to say that we've got the following nominations. We've got Lindsay Green and Trina Davis, who have volunteers. Are there any other nominations to be considered? We don't just need two. No? So that's fine. Do we need to vote on that, or do we just go? No? No, we don't need to vote. So that's absolutely fine. And so now we come on to the member and officers report, and these are all to note. And the first one we've got, which is a really good paper, and I must commend it, is from Laura Stephen, who is our Senior Housing Strategy and Enabling Officer. It's really good news. It's informative, and oh, you've joined us. Lovely to see you. Right.
Thank you, Matty. Yes, this very brief information sheet outlines key initiatives introduced in the last couple of years to strengthen local resources to prevent and reduce rough sleeping, and gives an overview of the recent county-wide partnership funding bid to DLUC for the Rough Sleeping Initiative Fund for services that will support the commitment to end rough sleeping by 2025. I hope it's quite informative. It is quite brief. But have you any questions?
Any questions on this or comments?
Yeah.
No, thank you.
I mean, I quite would like a overview at some point of all the provision that is there in the Stroud district. Is there a list or a bit of a template for that? So also, for example, and also the young people provision, I would like to know a bit more sort of what actually exists.
Yes, we can certainly do that. There is a range of services that aren't necessarily directly rough sleeper focused, but are part of that pathway. So yes, can certainly provide you with that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No. Welcome this report, Laura, and there's some really good work. I mean, the government, when we were obliged to house everybody, and I know you really pulled all the stops out to do all that, and quite a lot's come out of that, hasn't it? So I can't thank you enough for all you're doing, you and all your team. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we'll move on to tenant representatives, and we've got, have we got an update from? Yeah, lovely.
Well, one of the things that we have been looking at is scrutiny panels. And one of the things that we'd like to look at is voids and turnaround time, things like what state they actually are when the tenant takes over. Because my friend Becky has said it doesn't encourage people to look after the place and make it look nice if they're given something that's not that fantastic to start with. So that's one of the things we're looking at. So we're going to recruit some more tenants for the scrutiny panels on that. The main thing that worried me was the turnaround time. I mean, we're not supposed to give examples, but I can think of one that's taken 14 months from where the tenant left and went to prison, and it still hasn't been let. And I know this is not even on home seekers yet either, although it's supposed to be finished. So it's one of the things that we want to look at. It's not, one of the main things is we will look at other councils to see how they're handling their voids, to see where we fall, whether we're good, bad or indifferent. And I think that's about all at the moment. Watch this space.
Yeah, so I've actually got stuck in and I actually went to see the tenants that were getting the scrutiny panel together, and it was really interesting. It was a really nice day, and there was a few of the residents weren't quite sure what it entailed and whether they actually wanted to do it. But Mel was there and she was explaining, you know, it's to help the council. It's not to tittle-tattle on your neighbours and get people into trouble. It is to help the council so that we have got a voice as tenants. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. Yeah, and what else have we got? We went to Littlecombe, didn't we, as well, which was really, really good. We missed you, Adrian, because you were not very well. We managed to get to see Joe before we left, which was really interesting as well. So we went upstairs, saw where they did all the calls and all the different computer systems that they use, and they are currently in the process of having a new IT system, which should help rather than working off 3 or 4 different systems. But yeah, we have been getting stuck right in now. It's all coming together nicely.
Thanks both of you. That's lovely to hear how much is going on and how much you're wanting to do. That's you know, that's apart from what we're doing here. And you know, again, I give my appreciation for you joining this committee. Thank you. We're on to performance management Q3, and we haven't got Laurie with us, but we've got Lindsay. If you want to talk to this report, or do you just want to let people read it? Up to you.
To be honest, I would like to think that it's quite self-explanatory. Yeah, obviously there are a few that we've got on, from sort of page 49 onwards, some that haven't got targets in. Obviously, Keith has said to us that, there are quite a few things that, we haven't got the data on just yet, but that will be coming. But I think, obviously, we've tried to kind of get up what we felt, both me and Laurie, to be honest, the things that we felt were most important and most important to Housing Committee as well. So, yeah, I can't really say much more than that. Things do, obviously things are going to change because obviously Joe's not with us now, and obviously I'm not sure if we've got anybody else taking over these bits yet. Yeah. No. Sorry, put you on the spot a bit there.
No, just because Joe's left, none of this will be left unattended. I think that's we've interim support in place. There's an appointment process going on, but none of these will be left unattended because Joe's not here.
Oh no, I wasn't. I just meant I didn't know who was going to be.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean it to sound that way. But yeah, we've tried. If anybody does have any other things that they feel are important as well, then we'd be more than welcome to add those in as well. But we just felt that to sort of start off with, that's a good sort of base point. Anything else to add, Keith?
First of all, I've enjoyed working with you on this piece. It's work in progress. I think we need to get the work around a small number of key areas of performance honed down so that they can, and of course anything that comes in the meantime or anything that is any way seen as unsatisfactory or risk or not on target is open to be scrutinised. But I'm pleased that there's a good working relationship with members and officers. So thank you.
Good to see some members of the Youth Council joined you on your last call. Yeah, members of the Youth Council joined you on your last call.
They did, yes.
Yeah, very good.
Yes.
Very pleased to hear that.
Yeah.
I'm sure you get them a lovely welcome. We're on to the task and finish groups, which, as you know, have done an amazing amount of work over the year and are winding down now. And the first one, last week, I would have introduced Chris Jockle because he led on that and led on it really well, I think it's fair to say. But he did send in a very long report, so by email, didn't he?
Yeah.
We've just found it. I knew he had, but we've just found it. So hope you've all got it, and it's gone out to everyone.
That was an email on the, what is it saying? 21st of June.
It sent it out before the last meeting. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know if any other members of that task and finish group, I know I'm not putting you on the spot, Steve, but if you want to say anything, that's welcome. No. It's been an amazing group, hasn't it? And a lot more work, I think it's fair to say. So the next one is 21st of June. It came from, I hope it came from Democratic Services, didn't it?
No, this came, I received it from Chris Jockle.
Right.
And I think maybe he didn't look at
Haven't you had it?
He sent it to Keith. And
it would have been included
Gordon,
as part
Joe,
of the published papers.
It was?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. I know I've seen it somewhere.
Those who have paper copies would have had it in the post as well, so you had updated ones.
well, let's keep that over till next time then.
Yes, yeah, shall we?
No, you sort of Yeah, feel we've got to all have had a look at it and
Yeah.
before we start.
We'll move that to next time then. Okay. It was a really long, it was a really detailed piece of work. Shall I move on to tenant engagement and empowerment? We've got Colin here with us tonight.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Chair. First of all, really important, the scrutiny panel is being set up and being trained, and they're hoping it'll be up and running in September. This is good because there is nothing better than tenants scrutinising the service, and I'm really pleased to hear that. Now, the meetings at Foster Cricket Club, where there were 3 sessions, one in the morning, the afternoon and the evening, was well received, and 16 new tenants were interested in roles. So that again, more tenants, more, this is what we want. Recruitment of a new officer, as Michelle said, I hope that happens sooner than later. The housing hubs have started and been well received in Stonehouse and Pagan Hill. It's planned these sessions to be once a month, and it's also planned that the police will be invited to them, which again is important. There's a TPAS housing conference, which staff and tenants are to be invited. As Michelle mentioned, the STAR tenant satisfaction survey should start in October. So that would be good to see that data when it comes out. And Michelle has asked me if we can meet regular to update me on the action plan. So again, it's important, but I'm really pleased that we are getting a lot more tenant engagement, because that's what the Task and Finish group was set up for. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the officers on the Task and Finish group, and also the councillors that were on the group. I think that's about it. That's it.
Thank you very much, Colin. I know it's been a difficult year for you health-wise,
Yes,
and you've hung on in there, and we've hung on in with you, and I'm really pleased to see you rounded this up at the end of the civic year. And I know you've worked very closely with Michelle at times, and it's come out with a lot of work, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Any comments on anything? No? Jenny, sorry.
The comment. I hope I've got the right one page, on page 55, next steps. I wondered, when we go to the next step with our complaint response letters to invite and encourage complaints to become involved and help improve our services, could we work with an independent organisation, so tenants who wish to make a complaint feel they've got somebody independent to help them with this process, because then they would feel more confident if they had somebody, not the council, assisting them and empowering them. Is that possible?
Certainly it was a very good point, and it's certainly something to be looked at, I think. Wouldn't you agree, Colin? So we move on to, sorry.
I just wanted to comment on Jenny's comment. Isn't that what the ward members are for? If a tenant has a cause to complain, isn't that what the members are for? So they've got someone to complain to. Is it not our job to address that for them?
I think it can be, but I think Jenny was thinking about somebody who's truly independent rather than have got an axe to grind with anything else. Yes, well, but some councillors take on more ward work than others. So I think some councillors take on more ward work than others. So I think it's, you know, it's not, there's not a councillor standing on every corner and perhaps they didn't even know about it. Did you want to say something?
Just to say that the rules have recently changed, so people can also write to the Ombudsman. Previously, they had to wait till they'd gone through the complaints system and had a response to the level 1 or level 2 complaint, but now they can call in write to the Ombudsman at the same time. So, you know, that if they're not happy with our response, at least they know it is being looked at by somebody independent.
And I think it's a lovely thing because we're now encouraging people who complain, and I'm not looking at somebody I could throw a stick at here, people who complain, and to get them involved in the service, and because they, you know, they really make a valuable contribution to how we can, you know, proceed on this. So I think that's one of the issues too about complainants. And you know, let's face it, people don't always want to make a complaint. They just want to make things better too, don't they? So thanks for that. Okay, any more on that? Shall we move on to, I'm sorry, I'm turning the page. I was on to a little F, so then I thought I'd done it. Housing Repairs Voids Task and Finish Group Summary Report. And shall I, I'm talking here about Paula.
Thank you, Matthew. And first of all, I've got a terrible admission to make. I didn't actually attend the last meeting because I had work, so I might rely on Becky for the. Were you not there either, Adrian? So I'm.
Thank the Lord, Adrian hasn't gone off on a call because he's on call tonight, so he might have disappeared. So do you want?
Well, I'll sort of run through what I know, and then I'll rely on Adrian for the rest. So as we reported back previously, the first area that we looked at was voids, and I think we concluded that back in about January, and then we went on to repairs. The first area that we looked at ways which the whole process could be streamlined within the organisation, and that was additional to the work that obviously the voids team were doing in terms of additional funding and additional sort of resources that they could bring in to reduce the void repairs. And those recommendations were presented in January, I think. And then we went on to repairs, which again is another enormous service. So we identified that the new system is critical to how we take these things forward. There was work done actually with Becky where they identified that the flow of communication was a bit faulty at present with the existing system because the text messaging services weren't working, but they were resolved, weren't they? Yeah. So at the moment, our customers can actually find out what's going on and respond back. We worked with Michelle's developing handbook to identify more clearly and also agree whose responsibilities various repairs were between the tenant and the landlord, because there is some ambiguity on some of them, and some of them in some cases would be the customers, in some cases they would be the landlords, and to actually sort of make sure that that was visible on the ongoing handbook. And we also looked at the difficulties there are with some of the new renewable, normally heating, in repairs, because there is a significant gap for available technicians and engineers to maintain the new technologies, particularly as they keep developing. And I think there's obsolescence built into some of the systems, the earlier systems, and it's really difficult to repair. We did look at future recommended groups, which are all nicely listed in Adrian's report there, but I wasn't there for the final meeting, so that's really dreadful. So over to you, Adrian.
Yes, hi. So in terms of where we are to date in terms of voids, work in progress is down to around just hovering over 50. So in the last 12 to 14 months, that's come down from 164. There is an enormous amount of work that's gone into being able to do that. There are some lingering older properties that we are looking to resolve over the next 6 months. But in general terms, our objective of getting people in properties is on track. In terms of repairs, the system change is fundamental to us. That contact management and one consistent contact management system is critical in not only establishing what we're doing, but recording every contact that we have with them and what works have been and not been done. And in terms of the task and finish group we had, it's fair to say it was a very open task and finish group where lots of things were shared. Officers were as honest as possible in relaying what the problems and difficulties there are. Naturally, our services overlap with other groups, so they overlap with retrofit. The biggest concern for us is around being able to recruit and resource, maintaining all of our systems going forward over the next decade. There are movements in the market, but the reality is the movement from gas to renewables. There's not the same level of knowledge and education and training available to get us in a position where the coverage is the same. So that's certainly a concern and something that we think we should look at for the future. And also overlapping with tenant engagement, we realise that we are a service provider. We are very property focused, and we welcome that overlap and engagement in able to bring more of the home aspects of the property and what the repair service can do, rather than just being black and white. Repair service, our responsibility, your responsibility. So those are the kind of areas that we teased out of the task and finish group over the last 9 to 10 months, and I can say it's been really valuable for us as officers, being able to share and the issues and get feedback about what's happening out there from a tenant perspective.
Thank you very much. Can you just repeat those figures for me? I didn't quite catch them. I'd like to hear them again.
So our work in progress figures, we managed to push sign off over the weekend, Thursday, Friday and Saturday, approximately 22 more. So with the limited number that we had in last week, we're looking at work in progress of about 52.
I just think that's brilliant. I think, coming back to pre-COVID levels was one thing, but we had 70 on average pre-COVID, so now we've got even less than that in these challenging times when getting the workforce has been really hard. And when I know we've heard an awful lot about Void and an awful lot of the money that we could have used in income. But when we compare it to something like Crossrail, which went millions and millions over budget, and it still got praise, I think we should, I feel like Standard Bank giving you an ovation to you and your team. I think you've been absolutely brilliant. So thank you very much for those wonderful figures tonight. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you. I see the last point under voids. You said about the utility transfer debts. Where are we with that? Because I'm aware of one that has been ongoing for really quite some time in Sharpness. How many have we got that are under utility debts? Because the last time I was told that nobody could kind of do anything. We were kind of in a bit of a stalemate with it because of this utility debt. Is that actually going to get resolved anytime soon? Because I know that this one is probably 2 years now.
That one is complete and is going through the process of being let if it's not already let at this time. So the process of utility transfer is we are now engaged with a firm called Energy Angels that effectively acts as our intermediaries with transfers. That has only recently in the last few weeks started. Hopefully that should make it easier in getting meters changed if need be, ISO switches changed, and critically getting power onto the property. We do have some problems with some older ones with key meters that just won't wipe, so we can't do the electrical test, but they are minimum in numbers. And I would say there are about 5 that are problems that Energy Angels will be helping us resolve them. But I can think of, there's one in Chapel Street and there's another one in Springfield Court that's got an issue with it. We just cannot wipe the debt off the electric key, no matter the number of attempts we've tried. So yes, it's an improving position. The one at Sharpness was a one-off and it was very extreme. We've had others that have taken 3 to 4 months to resolve, and we've had one person dedicated on just managing all the different utility providers on and on and on, trying to resolve them. Hopefully that with the onboarding of Energy Angels, then it should be a lot more streamlined in terms of getting the power on ready so that work can actually start on the time and date that we expect to start.
And what do you anticipate the time reduction being through working with these people? Because you said that sort of average sort of time, 3-4 months. Do you anticipate it sort of slashing that in half, or only a month, or 2 weeks? What do you have a target that they are going to be working towards to get these properties back into action?
In terms of the utility provision, we have a 4-hour agreement to get power onto that property. So that's if all the boxes are ticked in order to be able to do that, but that's essentially where we need to get to. And the way we're working towards is being able to get into a normal operating position where each category of void is then being performance managed to that category of void. At the moment, we're still juggling catch up with numbers versus categories versus scale of works. But by the end of this calendar year, I want all the old ones gone and operating as a normal void contractor based on the 4 different timescales relevant to each void.
And on your point about the significant gap in renewable maintenance markets, have we linked up with the colleges, the Science and Technology Park down at Berkeley, the Active Building Centre, which I know that myself, Jenny and Matty went along to? Are we actively getting them involved with helping to train up staff in these, that is their speciality? So are we actively seeking that out, or are we just sitting back and saying we can't get the training?
No, we've actively engaged with that, with the college down there. We've also actively engaged with existing contractors and how they're going to go about it. It's kind of any option is open to discussion. If we can piggyback with contractors as well in order to get people trained, that's what we'll do. But all options are open. That's what I mean about moving it towards a group on its own, is to discuss those options and how that's targeted and how that best suits the council.
So we've spoken to them, we've not put anything in motion to actually get any training started yet then?
Not at this point, but the next round of apprenticeships, we are targeting for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Adrian and Paula, for those very fulsome explanations. I think that's been a really successful group, hasn't it? You've been on that, haven't you, Beth? Yeah. It's been, well, they've all been great in different ways, but it's marvellous the way we've feel we've helped move things on. And thank you. Okay, we're on to the work programme. Any remarks on the work programme? We have moved the older person strategy and tenant handbook reports to the January committee so that we can we'll have time to consider the budget items in December. So that's the only change on there from last time. So any comments on that? No. Well, we haven't got any members' questions, so I think we're at the end of our meeting. So, and I've just got a piece of paper here that should have been read out at the outset of the meeting. So.
I'll let you off.
It's a completely different format, so I didn't read it. Look, it's very smart. I don't know who designed it, but it's very smart, and I should have read it out. So anyway, I'll just tell you to go have a nice evening. There's lots of the evening still left, and check your post. And I'm really glad all your mobile phones were switched off and we didn't have a fire. So that's about all I can say, really. Thank you very much for attending that very nice meeting tonight. Good night, all.
Yeah.
And thank you to all the officers who have attended.